For 15 long months, the UK's population has been locked down and forced to comply with the government's COVID regulations. In March of 2020, we were told it would take just 12 weeks to get the virus under control. How wrong they were. And in that time, businesses have gone bankrupt, operations have been cancelled, millions have been abandoned by the NHS, and mental health issues have skyrocketed. And people have been unable to say goodbye to their loved ones. Elderly people have been left to suffer alone, and despite the incredible vaccine rollout, the UK is still in lockdown, unlike many other countries which are now opening up. And quite rightly, people are angry, people are frustrated, and people are incensed by parliamentarians who pretend to listen, don't care, break the rules, and as we now know, they also break the law. And today in London, thousands of people are taking to the streets to make their anger known. And we will be showing what is really going on with live updates from the route of today's march. And we have reporters on the ground, and we also have reporters in the air. It's really important we broadcast the truth. This is Freedom March Live. Well, a very good afternoon to you wherever you are watching. Well, there is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has, affected every single one of us in ways that were unimaginable just a year or so ago. And of course, millions have died, families have been ripped apart, and society has been destroyed. And it all began in March of last year when the Prime Minister stopped non-essential contact and travel. And if you remember, he told us we could turn the tide of coronavirus in 12 weeks. However, 3 lockdowns later, we are still incarcerated, we're robbed of our freedoms, and many people, particularly the elderly, are too frightened to venture out. The UK has never seen such draconian powers exercised by a government in peacetime. And on the 23rd of March last year, the first lockdown was announced, and the Coronavirus Act passed through Parliament. Now, that gave the government carte blanche. And that is the like of which has never been seen outside a war setting. In April, we were told we were past the peak of the pandemic by the Prime Minister. And if you remember his garbled message about work from home, don't work from home, or do work from home, that followed the next month. And the first lockdown then ended in June. But in August, the fated Eat Out to Help Out scheme was launched, which unwittingly spread the virus. The second lockdown began in October of last year, which was eased to allow families to mix at Christmas. And of course, that turned out to be another massive mistake. The third lockdown began in January, and we are still yet to fully unlock, despite the government's assurances that lockdown would end on 21st of June. And that is the Monday just gone. And one other point that I think is really worth making is that the government constantly refused to entertain a discussion about something called the Great Barrington Declaration. Now, this was a document signed by eminent clinicians across the globe, and the declaration made it clear that the strategy should be different. It should be to protect the clinically vulnerable and the elderly, but crucially, it should allow everyone else to build up a level of natural immunity as they got on with their lives. And of course, the government, what did they do? They ignored those eminent scientists and clinicians, and instead they chose a different route. They chose more lockdowns, more tiers, more restrictions, and it made no difference. The new variants of COVID ripped through the population regardless. I think it's also worth remembering that when the government launched its roadmap, you'll all remember, it said it would be based on data and not dates. And of course, another government lie. And the British people have been incredible, and for the most part, I think people have behaved impeccably. The vaccine rollout has been a huge success, but despite this, the British people are being treated with contempt by a government and by an opposition that are frightened of their own shadows. And now more than ever, we need political leadership. We do not want politicians hiding behind scientists, frightened to make decisions. And that is why people are marching. They are saying enough is enough. We want our lives and we want our freedom back. Now, we have no idea how many people will attend today's march, and over the past year or so, I think you'll agree it's been incredibly difficult to get the truth from the mainstream news broadcasters, and the reason for that, many of them are being funded by government to spread its propaganda. So today we are taking matters into our own hands. We are going to provide you at home with unique, unparalleled coverage of the march. We will have reporters on the streets. We'll also be talking to people taking part in the march. We'll also be hearing opinion from around the country. And we are also deploying our secret weapon. And that weapon is a broadcast helicopter in the sky. And the reason for that is so we can see exactly what the scene is in central London, and we can show you those pictures as they happen. OK, before we go there, let's just have a look at the route of today's march. It is 7.57 kilometres or 4.7 miles. And here is the map. So on the left of the map there, where the green dot is, that is Hyde Park Corner. And essentially, the marchers will then go up the side of Hyde Park. They will then reach the top of Hyde Park at Marble Arch and turn right into one of the most iconic streets in London, that of course being Oxford Street. At the bottom of Oxford Street, they will reach Oxford Circus. Another right turn takes you down the rather magnificent Regent Street with all of its splendid buildings. So the march then proceeds down Regent Street until it reaches Piccadilly Circus, of course the site of Eros. These are massively important London destination sites. From there, it goes on to Haymarket and on to Trafalgar Square, and from Trafalgar Square onto the Embankment. Now, this is when we believe things may get a little bit interesting, because obviously the march will then pass Westminster and the Houses of Parliament, the very place, allegedly the seat of democracy, the place where parliamentarians have decided laws that have locked us up and kept us away from our families. So those scenes will be very interesting to watch. From Westminster and the Houses of Parliament, the march then moves, as you can see there, from there to Victoria Street and then goes up Grosvenor Place and up to Hyde Park Corner, and it finishes where that red dot is on the left of your screen. Now, that is quite a route, I have to tell you. So I told you it was 4.7 miles. Let's compare that with the People's Vote March. That was 1.86 miles. So we have a very long march here. We have absolutely no idea how many people are going to turn out today. And the police were very keen to downplay the numbers that might be there. I know the organiser of today's march was visited by police, and that footage is widely available. But let's see what happens today. We are your eyes and ears on the ground in London, and we are the only broadcaster showing you what is going on. So I do believe we can go and see for ourselves what is really going on in central London. As I said, we have a helicopter flying, heading towards London, and Richard Tice is our intrepid reporter from the helicopter. We'll go to him in a second. He is just making his way over central London. But we also have a bus parked on the route as well. The bus is at Marble Arch. Now, just to refresh your memory, that is on the way up that first part of the route. And here we can see people amassing for the march. And I have to tell you, I've been watching these scenes for the last 2-3 hours, and we are now starting to see people really turning out in their droves. Allegedly, the mood earlier was one of sort of fun and a sort of camaraderie. But let's find out from our reporters on the bus exactly what the mood is and what exactly is going on.
David, can you hear me?
So Calvin Robinson is our man on the bus. Calvin, can you just describe the scene for me?
It is like a carnival. We have masses and masses of people joining from all over the country. In fact, not even just the country, we've got national flags from all over the world. People are amassing to fight for our freedoms. On this bus right here, I've got Julia Hartley-Brewer is going to be joining me shortly. Hello, Julia. How are you?
Hello. Very well.
Your
Very
first march, I believe.
It's my first march on this issue. Absolutely. I'm not really a marcher, and I think that's what's interesting. So many people here never gone on a march before.
Exactly.
Finally saying enough is enough. I'm done.
And what is it that's bringing people out for the first time?
I think people just feel they've been treated unfairly. They've done the right thing. They've obeyed all the rules. They've gone and got their double jab.
Yep.
A lot of people here I've been speaking to have only come on the march because they've been double jabbed, and they were promised the vaccine's the route out.
Yep.
If the vaccine isn't enough, we're never
So
ever going to get out of this. And they're saying enough is enough. I want my freedom back.
The shifting goalposts, the hypocrisy from our leaders, and the fact that the jabs and all the measures we've taken do not have any effect. What is the point in all of it? Enough is enough, exactly. Julia, are you going to be out there with the crowds later?
Certainly am, absolutely. We've been walking through Hyde Park. The atmosphere is wonderful. It's so friendly and warm. People from a whole variety of backgrounds and lives and jobs and different viewpoints. There are people with viewpoints I don't agree with entirely here. We're all united with one thing, though, that we want to have our freedoms back. We want the old normal. It was brilliant.
Absolutely.
We don't want a new normal. The old normal, end to masks, end to the social distancing and all of that. And the atmosphere is fantastic. And I can't wait to get back down off the bus and join them again.
No new normal, no building back better, back to our old normal, back to our old routines. Absolutely, enough is enough. Julia Hartley-Brewer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As you can see, millions and millions of people are going to be out here today. Look at this crowd. Look at this crowd behind me. We've got people crossing over from Marble Arch into the Hyde Park. Everyone's cheerful. Everyone's happy. It really is like a carnival vibe. We've got people with vuvuzelas. Everyone's here to join the same cause, and that is to get our freedoms back. How's it looking from up in the air?
Well, I'll butt in there for the moment. Thank you very much for the moment, Calvin. I mean, extraordinary scenes there. As you can see, people gathering at Hyde Park Corner. The march was due to start at 1 o'clock. We always thought it would be slightly later, but as you can see, people making their way down towards the start at Hyde Park Corner. That bus, our bus, is at Marble Arch. So if you are there, go and say hello. So obviously people are massing there, and this isn't just about London, this is about the whole country. I'm actually in a studio in the east of England, and our social media hub, which is taking all your views and your feelings and everything that you want to share, is based in Bristol, and I'm delighted that we can go now to our social media man, Jamie Lowe. Jamie, what are people saying?
Yeah, well, this is the hashtag hotspot. This is where I'm going to be aggregating all of the views and opinions, conflicting as though they may be, from today's protest. We've got a lot of people actually sort of supporting from behind a keyboard. Of course, you know, with a pandemic, you know, apparently in full force, people are still probably wanting to shy away from crowds. Although we can see many people, many thousands of people gathering in London today. So still some people supporting from the sidelines. But we've had a few conflicting opinions already, and now that's to be expected with such you know, a polarizing issue. But a Bite Badger says people on the hashtag Freedom March are ironically free to protest, but what are they protesting against? My last 6 weeks: pubs, gigs, cafe friends, picnic, office, mum's house, shopping. Sure, a mask had to be worn, but restrictions soon will lift. But I think, unfortunately, that tweeter just there has maybe missed the point of what's going on here. We are seeing thousands of people out there in London today demanding the end of all these restrictions. I just did the maths. I actually totted up how many days we've had a lockdown for. 461 days in lockdown. That's more than 11,000 hours. And I'm sure we'll have more strong opinions throughout the course of today's coverage. So do keep them coming in. Hashtag Freedom March if you'd like to voice your opinion, and I'll get it on the air for you.
Super duper. Thank you very much indeed for the moment, Jamie, there in our Bristol social media hub. Just in terms of numbers, we have absolutely no idea how many people are going to turn up at this. I think it's just worth putting this into perspective. At the People's Vote March, which was in 2018, the organisers claimed there were 750,000 there. The police later said there were 250,000, and then the march in 2019, again, People's Vote, if you remember, demanding a second Brexit referendum, and that was estimated to be between 300 and 400,000 by independent sources. So today will be very interesting indeed. So to get a very good sense of what's going on, I'm delighted that we can now throw to the helicopter where our very intrepid reporter Richard Tice has a bird's eye view. Well, as you can see, I've got a very nice picture of Richard. His shirt, it's the least dressed up I've ever seen him. Okay, so we've lost that signal, as you can see. We will attempt to regain that signal as soon as we possibly can. I think there were lots of issues that will be brought up in this. So there is the scene live from the air. As you can see, people amassing. I'm just trying to get my geography here. So obviously people going down to the start of this march, and from what I can tell from these pictures that you're seeing, these are live pictures, that people have not started that march yet. They're still congregating. But it's really good to know that it's a festival atmosphere, because I think the police were concerned that things may not be quite so jolly. So at the moment, a very nice festival atmosphere, live pictures coming to you from central London. So whilst we try and reconnect to the helicopter, which we will do shortly, let's go back to the bus and talk to Calvin. Calvin, can you update us any further?
I can, absolutely. So many people are coming out here for so many different reasons, but I wanted to talk to Julia Hartley-Brewer about what's happened over the last couple of days, the hypocrisy in our governments.
Once again, I mean, we had it with G7, didn't we? And that was really over the line, I think, for a lot of us in terms of the rules we're allowed to have about meeting up with people, and all the nonsense with the elbows and the masks over the faces, and then they're at a barbecue. Yeah. And then, of course, we had the hypocrisy over the UEFA officials, because it turns out that you can't go away to visit a relative without coming in without quarantine, but you can, or go on holiday if you've been working all year, but you can if you happen to have the right ticket for the right football match and you're a sponsor for UEFA. I mean, unbelievable hypocrisy. But I think really the real point at which people have said, I'm really done now, is that horrific image. Now the video as well.
Oh, gosh,
I mean, excuse me for a moment.
The video was enough, wasn't it? Oh.
And of Matt Hancock canoodling on the, hands, face, arse with his aide. And the thing was, this was on May the 6th. Right. On May the 6th, people were being told they had to sit separately at funerals. Mm-hmm. We had the Queen at the Prince Philip's funeral sitting on her own just a couple of weeks beforehand. This was a man who was literally signing the legislation, literally writing the legislation, telling people that we had to be social distance, telling people you couldn't hug someone in the office, because that was actually wasn't guidance. At that time, it was the law. You could only be inside with someone not from your household if you were in a bubble for important medical reasons, or you had necessary work. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure what he was doing was necessary.
It didn't look necessary to me.
No, I mean, and again, it's that whole one law for them and one law for us. They make the laws, they don't care about the laws because they don't obey the laws themselves.
And what's funny is it happened on May the 6th, and what happened on May the 6th last year was Neil Ferguson. Obviously, he went and had an affair with somebody as well. And Matt Hancock said on camera that I think it was right for him to resign. Therefore, should Matt Hancock not be resigning right now?
He should absolutely resign. If you are someone making the laws, people having an office affair or politicians having affairs, that is, I'm sorry, their own business. That unless there is an aspect of hypocrisy, which there is here, which is that you are telling everyone else how to live their lives. The government is able to tell us whether we're allowed to hug people, kiss people, whether single people are allowed to meet up on a date, whether we're allowed to go for a walk with someone, whether we're allowed to dance at a wedding, whether we're allowed to sing, go to your child's sports day. The government has put its tentacles into every aspect of our personal, intimate, private lives and relationships, and yet he is there happily having an affair with an aide during working hours, paid for by us. No one could discern her qualifications to be in that job in the first place. Yes, he should absolutely resign. And I think this is very damaging for the government, very damaging for Hancock and for Boris Johnson. Because again, it's just this idea that we are above this somehow, and the rules only matter for the plebs like you and me.
And people have witnessed their loved ones dying without being able to kiss them, without being able to hug them, and he's there canoodling with his aide. Hypocrisy is one thing, but I do have to disagree with you on the affair side, because this is a person who is in the public sphere. He should be a moral guidance, he should be leading us, and to have an affair with his aide when he's a married man with a family, and she is a married woman with a family, is disgraceful.
Oh, no.
Years ago, they would have had to resign for that alone.
Look, I agree with you. I don't like it. It is not something I approve of, absolutely. However, I don't think that in itself should be a resigning matter, except when it impinges on us. You can't tell everyone else how to live their lives and then not live it yourself. And again, it is just that feeling that it's not only the hypocrisy that, oh, they don't matter to us. It tells you they don't really think the laws are necessary.
No, of course not.
And that was the thing. And Professor Neil Ferguson, he was cycling across London to be with his lover. He had COVID, and his justification was, well, I wasn't a risk to anybody.
Exactly.
Because I'd already had COVID. Well, I had COVID in March 2020. I've not been a risk. No one's been a risk to me, and I've not been a risk to them all that time. But I've still had to follow the laws. And lots of us have been saying, if you've had COVID, or if you've had the double vaccine, why on earth should you still have those rules? Anyone who's vulnerable, who wants to be double vaccinated, can have had the double vaccination by now. We should have been free, we should have been free from about May last year. Certainly we should have been freed from 21st of June.
Of course.
And for this to continue, when we know that no one in government actually thinks the laws actually matter. None of them are obeying them unless they think they'll get caught. Why are they imposing rules on us which they don't think are necessary for them?
So these arbitrary rules are confidence-building measures, aren't they? They're not for our health.
No.
When people have had PCR tests prove that they're negative, and people have had the vaccination so they shouldn't be vulnerable, and they're still having to self-isolate because they've been in contact with someone, it doesn't make any sense.
But it tells you what a nonsense it is. And it's the whole idea, well, you can't have different rules for different people. Well, sorry, tell that to G7 and UEFA. I mean, I had so many people get in touch saying, we can't go to a sports day, we can't see our child's play, or to one parent going to the child's graduation. School discos being cancelled. For goodness sake. I mean, again, the different rules apply. For a pilot event, if you happen to be a mate or of the Prime Minister, or you happen to be running a sport that he likes, or he thinks we the masses like football.
Special exceptions.
Then there are exceptions, but not an exception for the really important family events, which are their rites of passage, not just for children, but for parents. And there's been so much in our lives that has been lost in the last year and a half. And when you know it's not necessary, and we've all been careful, haven't we? I'm not someone who thinks COVID isn't a risk.
No, of course.
I've got parents in their 70s. We've absolutely been very careful about access with them and meeting outdoors.
But it's personal responsibility, isn't it?
Personal responsibility. The idea that we're all too stupid and irresponsible, that we can't make decisions based on our own level of risk and the people with level of risk is a nonsense.
So do you think that hypocrisy is what's bringing so many people out today?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would have come out even before the Matt Hancock story. I think the weather has rather helped. It was supposed to be chucking it down today. Oh. The COVID gods have smiled on us for the weather. But no, I think the UEFA story on top of G7 and Hancock, I think that has piled on so much anger and exasperation from people, as I said, who don't go on marches. Most of the people here, like me, they haven't got a t-shirt or a badge on, they haven't got a placard. They're just ordinary people who just want their ordinary lives back. Because the old ordinary, the old normal was great.
I love that. Ordinary people wanting their ordinary lives back. Julie Hartley-Brewer, thank you so much. Over to you, David, in the studio. We'll be joined by Emma Webb shortly.
Thank you very much to you, Gavin, and also to Julia Hartley-Brewer. I want to pick up on something that Julia just said, which I still am struggling with. I, as someone who is older, have had 2 vaccinations. I actually was abroad. I came back on Friday of last week. I had an antigen test before I left the UK. I've had 2 negative PCR tests. I've been double jabbed. And then Test and Trace came round, and they have basically confined me to the east of England. I should have been presenting this show from London. I'm doing it from my home because I am not allowed out. It makes absolutely no sense at all. If you are enjoying watching this programme, then do feel free to donate, because we are paying for this to make sure that you actually get information that no other broadcast will dare to bring you. So you can do that. Visit our website. That is reformtv.uk/March. So that's reformtv.uk/March. Check that out. We've actually, at the moment, managed to amass quite a fair sum of money. I think people are very keen to get the truth, to know what is really going on. So if you've just joined us, this is Freedom March Live, and we are expecting many thousands of people to join on the route. And let me just show a map of the route, just to refresh your memories of where this is going. So at the moment, people seem to be amassing and making their way down to Hyde Park Corner. That is on the left there with the green dot. From there, they will walk up the side of Hyde Park, turn right into Oxford Street, as you can see, and then all the way down Oxford Street. And that's quite a walk, I can tell you. And then you reach Oxford Circus and turn right again, and that takes you down the very splendid Regent Street. I don't think even Regent Street has suffered very well with COVID. I think many businesses really struggling. Then, of course, from there, we go down to Piccadilly and down to Haymarket and onto the Embankment. And then this is the bit that I think many people are concerned about, is as it passes the Houses of Parliament. It seems extraordinary to me that people like Dominic Cummings, that Michael Gove, can basically break the rules and get away with it. And then Matt Hancock not only makes the rules, he breaks the rules, and it now seems that he breaks the law. It does seem like it's one rule for them and one rule for the rest of us. So that's Westminster. From there, they'll then come back up and they'll eventually join back up at Hyde Park Corner. So that's the route. So let me just throw to a message from Richard Tice about vaccinations and why they're important.
We've all had these discussions with our mates and our friends and family. Why are they making these illogical decisions when the data is so good? And I often say, follow the money. And just think back, the joy when the vaccines were approved and we were told, cancel Christmas to save Easter, by which time we'll have vaccinated the over 70s, the vulnerable, those who need shielding. Just a few more weeks. Do you remember? And then we got to that. We just need a few more weeks to vaccinate the over 50s. And we got to that, and then just a few more weeks and months to vaccinate all the adults. And you think, hang on, what did they tell us before? What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Pharma companies are making billions and billions of profits. And the more vaccines they sell, the more tests they carry out. All of a sudden, we're doing 1 million tests a day of healthy young adults and healthy young children. Why? The money. Follow the money. And now we learn it's not good enough to vaccinate all the adults. No. We've got to vaccinate all our children, despite the lack of data that it's safe to do so. Why? The money. Follow the money. They're making billions on testing. And then just think about the scientists, cabinet ministers. There's a huge merry-go-round. The quangos that sit on, the non-exec directorships on Big Pharma, the research grants, the university professors, the diplomas, the honorary degrees, all this good stuff. This is the elite circle that they all operate in, and they all look after each other. It's all about the money. Follow the money. That is the reason why this madness continues.
Well, it does seem absolutely extraordinary. If you look at the latest vaccine statistics, 43.6 million adults, that's 80% of adults have now had their first vaccine, and 31.9 million people, that is 60% of all adults have had both immunisations. Now, that is way above what we need to ensure that we can safely unlock. And it seems absolutely extraordinary that we are in this position, that essentially we're being controlled by a government that really doesn't have the mandate to do it. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the Coronavirus Act superseded all other legislation, and it built on the Public Health Act of 1984 and the Civil Contingency Act of 2004. I think what we're seeing is very worrying indeed. We are having some problems connecting to the helicopter, and that is simply because there are many thousands of people in London. Now, we were told there would not be that many people, but let's go and see what we can see. So these are images coming in, so you can actually see that there are a lot of people now on the march. We are trying to re-establish our connection with the helicopter. The problem with it is the more people that appear in London, they all start using up bandwidth of the cell signals. So the system that we're using uses multiple cells and multiple networks, but at the moment it is struggling. So we will be coming back to the helicopter shortly. So it's an extraordinary day, and I think we have an idea. So we've got the helicopter in the sky. We've also got our bus parked at Hyde Park Corner, and here it is. These are live scenes that are coming in from Hyde Park Corner. Now you can see the signal there is low because obviously just the sheer numbers of people that are actually out and about far exceed what the police, I think, expected and what the organisers probably expected. So we have a lot of people there, and our bus is parked at Hyde Park Corner, and I've got various people on top of that bus who will be taking in those sights as well. So if you've just joined us, this is Freedom March Live. We're showing live coverage of the march that's taking place in London. Thousands of people really saying enough is enough. They want their freedoms back. And actually, if you look at the roadmap that the government promised, it should have all been over by now. The last legal limit should have been removed on the 21st of June. And the government has been duplicitous, I believe. I think we're seeing very much double standards. I very much enjoyed seeing the pictures of Matt Hancock. Face, space and embrace is the latest rhyme to be going around the internet. So that is what we're watching. Freedom March Live, the numbers of people, the sheer number of people in London saying they've had enough and they want a return to their freedom. And I think Julia Hartley-Brewer says something really good. I don't want a new normal, I want the old normal. And I think most of us would agree with that. So let's now go and see if what people are saying. Whilst we try and re-establish those connections, let's go and see what people are saying in our social media hub in Bristol.
Thank you, David. Yes, lots going on social media. The sheer amount of people out there today marching through London is obviously going to generate a lot of social media traffic. That's what I'm going to be sifting through. I don't know whether you can see my screen right now, but I've got a picture here from what I believe is our helicopter. We might not be able to get a live video link to it just yet, but we do have this incredible image from shared by Isabel Oakeshott, just showing the sheer amount of people. I'm just zooming in. Hopefully you can see my screen right now, but there are people absolutely everywhere. A real important news event for the great British public. But if I was to take you to the BBC homepage, you wouldn't see any evidence of the march that was going on there. I've been told that you can't see my screen, but believe me when I say that the BBC aren't pushing anything to do with this march that's happening today. But thankfully there are many people out there tweeting from the ground telling us what's going on. However, not everybody is in support of today's event. Sue W here on Twitter says, #Freedom March, protesting about not being free whilst being completely free to protest. #oxymoron. And then Juan Diego here says, well done to those at the #London protest today. Unfortunately, I cannot be there, but I'm supporting you 100% to those that are there against it. Shut up, bootlickers. I would like to maybe inspire a bit more friendly social media interaction, but there we go. It's a real polarizing issue and people are feeling really strongly. But one thing that I'll show this picture again later when you can in fact see my screen, but there's a few celebs hanging around at the protest today. We've got a picture here of the Freds from Right Said Fred. They're there out on the march today, so if you do spot anyone famous, do tweet those pictures, #Freedom March, and I'll share them with everybody on the programme. David, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. I'm actually looking now at Sky News. Of course, absolutely no mention of the fact thousands of people are in central London. They're leading on the Matt Hancock story, saying that he's fallen short and the demand for his resignation seems to be growing. I mean, it does seem extraordinary that the minister responsible for curtailing all our freedoms is actually then breaking his own rules and breaking the law. And here are live shots coming into us of just the numbers of people in central London. If you go to any other news outlet, you will not see any pictures, you will not see any mention of this, and that's why we want to bring you these pictures. In terms of the helicopter, there are just so many people now on the streets of London that the bandwidth of the signal is now incredibly low, even though we're using broadcast quality equipment. I think it's really, I think the organisers will be pleased and delighted and rather shocked by the numbers that are actually on that march. These are live pictures from Hyde Park Corner as people go on this march. And as you can see, actually, it is very pleasant, it's good-natured, lots of flags and banners. There's Brazil going past. So I think this is really, what this says to me is that it's people from everywhere, people saying enough is enough. You know, the thing is, the government promised that if we did certain things and behaved in a certain way, they would unlock. And they had this roadmap, and they haven't stuck to the roadmap. They kept telling us about data, not dates, and then, quite frankly, ignored all the data and stuck to their own dates anyway. And now, when it suits them, they've extended lockdown. I don't think they understand what this has done to real people. It has destroyed businesses. The self-employed people got no help whatsoever from the government. They've had to take bounce-back loans, those people that pay themselves on dividends. It's simply not fair that we have to bankroll the government's ineptitude. And some people have done very well. Some people got furloughed, but I think you're going to see a strength of opinion now growing, particularly in light of the recent news stories that are making the headlines on all of those news portals. I think Matt Hancock is in a bit of trouble, and that is the understatement of the year. We're just trying to work out where we can go to next, just based on the signals. So have a look at this.
No one likes a hypocrite and hypocrisy. And yet, my word, we've seen plenty of it from our leaders recently, haven't we? Let's just remind ourselves of the hypocrisy of world leaders meeting down in Cornwall, having a lovely time, pretending with one photo that they were wearing masks and social distancing, and yet actually hugging and laughing and clapping and partying at the barbecue. The hypocrisy of it. And what do we see now? It looks like there's a small surge in cases. Guess where? In Cornwall, where the G7 summit was. The hypocrisy of Michael Gove, yes, Michael Gove, the cabinet minister, going to watch the Champions League football match in Portugal. He created his own brand new pilot scheme so that he didn't have to quarantine when he got back here to the UK. So he had a nice time with his son at the football, and yet they didn't have to quarantine coming back. The hypocrisy of cabinet minister Kwasi Kwarteng, travelling around the world on business trips as a cabinet minister, not having to quarantine when they get back. It's unbelievable, this hypocrisy. And then we learn that in Number 10 itself, they don't wear masks, they don't social distance, they haven't got any perspex screens, they have their own little gatherings, they have their own little canteen. They just carry on as normal, at the same time as demanding that we carry out all of these rules and regulations. They demand that our businesses spend fortunes on signage, on perspex, on screens, on PPE. They don't do it themselves. The hypocrisy is what infuriates us all. Utter, brazen hypocrisy. It's not good enough.
He's absolutely right. The hypocrisy is staggering. Let's go now to live shots from the helicopter. Let's see what we can see. As I said earlier, the communication between the helicopter and here is very difficult just based on the sheer number. Hooray! the sheer numbers of people in London. So these are live aerial shots coming in above central London. So it will be very interesting to see how many people actually are at this march. So as the helicopter winds its way around, what can we see? Where exactly are they? Is that Oxford Street, I think? Is that Selfridges, I think? There we are. Look, just the sheer numbers of people taking to the streets saying enough is enough, reclaim our freedom. And if you want to help out, you can by going to reformtv.uk/march, and there you can donate money, which will help us to continue coverage with these live aerial shots. Richard, are you there? Can you speak to me?
Hi there, David. Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me loud and clear? I am the eye in the sky.
I can't.
We've had some excitement.
Richard, these scenes are extraordinary.
Well, hopefully they're giving a good sense, David and everybody listening and watching, of the unbelievably huge numbers of people who are beginning to move down Oxford Street towards Oxford Circus. There are tens and tens of thousands of people on this march, and they are a fantastic combination, David, of freedom fighters, of democracy defenders, of liberty lovers. You know, people.
He'll be back in a minute, I'm sure. Oh, there we are.
And helicopter in the sky.
Well, as you can see, we can see Richard, and we can intermittently hear Richard. We're going to pictures which are frozen currently, but I think you get the sense, really, of just how many thousands of people are there. And I think the point that Richard was making there is a valid one, which is that these are not activists. These are not people who normally would be involved in a political march. These are people who are mums. These are people who are dads. These are people who are worried about their children's education. I mean, how ridiculous to make children wear masks in schools. I've never heard anything so nonsensical in my life. And as for the government's policy, if you remember, the whole idea was to ensure that we only vaccinated the elderly and the vulnerable. We were told that multiple times. The idea was you would vaccinate the elderly and the vulnerable, everyone else gets on with it. And of course, it means now the over 50s have been vaccinated, the under 50s. We're getting to a stage where we're now talking about vaccinating children. I have a major issue with that as a medic. These vaccines, we have no idea of the long-term effects of these. Now, I don't mind it as someone in their 50s having this vaccine, but I am not happy for children to have this vaccine. And the key to this is that you should never, the cure should never be worse than the disease. And I want to leave you with that thought. Let's go to the bus and see what's happening there.
By Emma Webb, who's been to many of these events before. Emma, how does this one differ from normal?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I noticed is that there seemed to be a lot more people early on in this march. So before there was it started with a sort of small accumulation of people, whereas here from the very beginning there seems to be lots of people. Yes. So I think it's probably fair to assume that there are possibly even more people here. And I think it's quite interesting as well that there's a real range of people here, different ages, people here for different reasons. So you can't just sort of lump everyone together in one group.
Absolutely. So it's definitely not a case of anti-vaxxers or any particular cause. There are lots of issues here. What are some of them that you've noticed so far?
Well, I think there are some people here are concerned about the vaccine. That doesn't make them anti-vaxxers. There are people here who are just angry about lockdown being, continued past June the 21st. I think people are really, really fed up. You can hear them right now screaming over there and shouting. And I think the point is that this cuts across, it cuts across politics, it cuts across generations. People are really fed up of having their civil liberties removed, and the fact that the government just seem to keep going on with this despite the fact that deaths are down, hospitalisations are down, and I think that people from a range of backgrounds and a range of politics are genuinely just fed up.
And it does seem like a very diverse crowd, doesn't it? You said a range of backgrounds, but we've literally got people from all across the world here with different flags, different nationalities, People are really united. What do you think is the main fundamental reason that everyone's coming together on this in this sense of unity?
I think it's something that affects everyone, and so especially what we saw in the last week with Matt Hancock, and even with the G7. I think people can see the hypocrisy of the government. We know that people aren't keeping the lockdown restrictions as tightly as they did before, because realistically we don't need to be. 80% of people, it was reported, have antibodies regardless of the vaccine. Huge numbers of people have already been vaccinated, and so I think people don't see the sense anymore in the lockdown restrictions, and that's something that affects everybody in society. It's not just kooky 5G conspiracy theorists.
Absolutely. So obviously Freedom Day has come and gone. People have said enough is enough. They're out here fighting for their freedoms back. Do you think we're going to see our freedoms return to us on the 19th of July, Emma?
I'm very sceptical. I didn't think that we were going to get our freedom back on the 21st of June either, and I hate to say I told you so, but I think they will keep kicking the can down the road, because we've seen with the statistics that, as I say, hospitalisations are down, deaths are down. There doesn't seem to be any reasonable reason why the lockdown measures should have even been postponed by another 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any reason to believe that they will be lifted. We haven't been given any guarantees. And I think something that is really bothering people, and is something that concerns me particularly, is that people ploughed so much money into preparing for Freedom Day. Companies will have spent everything they had getting ready to open, and to have the carpet pulled from underneath them again. And I think that people will see this as just being, a sort of arbitrary deadline that isn't a real Freedom Day. And the government don't seem to recognise that, lockdown isn't necessarily the cautious option. People are having their operations postponed, the backlog in the NHS. People will die as a result of lockdown. People's mental health, so many different problems. So really, there's something that has affected everyone, and I think that's something that I've noticed particularly on social media. That every single stripe politically, people's, from with a range of different views. People aren't coming at this from the same perspective, and it's absolutely wrong to paint people who are opposed to lockdown as being, some kind of conspiracy theorists, or the anti-maskers or the anti-vaxxers and so on. These are everyday people, reasonable people who are sick of arbitrary government restrictions on their civil liberties.
There's only so many times you can postpone the opening of your business before you can no longer afford to open it, isn't there? And obviously people have come out here to campaign. It's very peaceful, very jovial. It is like a carnival vibe. People are very happy. But how long will that last? If we don't get our freedoms back on the 19th of July, do you think we'll have another event like this? Or do you think it could turn nasty? Or will there be civil disobedience? How will people react, do you think, Emma?
I think a point will come when people will feel that the only option left is civil disobedience. So all the protesters here are very peaceful. So it's difficult to imagine it sort of turning nasty, because, as I say, it's a range of everyday people. It's the people who work in your local shop who are here today. But I think that people are getting really fed up, and it's the arbitrariness of the restrictions that I think are really getting people's goat. And if the government continue to extend these restrictions on people's liberties, I think people will, really, like you say, with people's businesses are going to go bust as a result of the deadline being moved from the 21st of June. That is going to happen. There are people who will die because their cancers haven't been diagnosed, and there will be thousands, hundreds of thousands of stories around the country of people's lives that have been decimated by these lockdown restrictions, and those stories are just not getting heard, and people are getting really frustrated. And I think that's why we see such a diversity of people here today. We don't know how many people are here, but certainly it's in the hundreds of thousands.
It really is a big number, isn't it? So we're going to go out and join the crowd in a moment. We're going to try and find Lawrence Fox and the crew, so we'll be out there on a remote camera. But for now, let's report back to David in the studio. Thank you very much, Emma Webb.
Super, thank you very much to both of you. I think those points are absolutely right. We have pictures coming in from the helicopter now. It is proving to be very difficult indeed, just from the sheer numbers. As you heard, thousands of people, probably tens of thousands of people in central London, which is making our signal very difficult. But these are live pictures coming in from central London. Whoa, you can see, I think, you really can see the sheer numbers of people. And as I was saying, these are not activists. These are real people with real jobs. And people have really struggled. I think for the most part, the British public have been absolutely extraordinary. The fact is that actually, unlike many other countries, the Brits do quite like being told what to do, but I'm not sure for how much longer. I think it's also, as we look at these pictures, I think it's also just worth pointing out one thing that I'm really keen to express, which is the reason we're finding more positive cases in this country is we test far more people than any other country. So that's one of the things. We test 10 times more people than Germany, for example, and we are testing 1 million people a day. And that is why we're seeing so many cases. And one more thing, in terms of the death rate, we are including people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID diagnosis, and that is explicitly against what the World Health Organization says. So it is impossible to compare countries. Let's see if we can talk to Richard Tice, who is in that helicopter now. Richard, can you hear me? So Richard, in that helicopter, those are live scenes above central London. If someone could tell me where roughly we are, my geography of London's pretty good, but I'm not entirely sure where they are. But the route of that march takes them down Oxford Circus, then it takes them down Regent Street. And we know that they obviously were going down Oxford Street. They have gone down Regent Street. I would assume that they are now somewhere. Here we are. So there we are. So from Hyde Park Corner up through Hyde Park to Oxford Street, Oxford Circus, down Regent Street to Piccadilly, and then down from Piccadilly to Haymarket and Trafalgar Square. Now you can see there on the river. They will then march down the embankment. Interestingly, we are hearing the helicopter above that march. And then from there, past the Houses of Parliament, this will be, as I keep saying, very interesting. This is the place. Let's go and see now some crowds, some live shots that are coming in, just to give you a sense of this. I mean, I find it extraordinary that no mainstream media is showing anything at all. And when you go back to the BBC, or if you go to Sky News, there is absolutely nothing. I've got a message that's come in, actually. One of our reporters is having difficulty reporting in, but says, I have no idea the numbers, but it's an awful lot, far more than the last one. And said, the atmosphere is absolutely incredible, even waiting in the park, whilst more people are streaming in. He says it's a really nice, friendly atmosphere, all sorts of people from all sorts of background just having a nice time. Yes, a nice time, but also hopefully sending a very powerful message to government that actually enough is enough. Stick to your word and don't break the law when you make the rules. I think that's a fairly strong message that the people are sending to the parliamentarians, and I think the parliamentarians need to take a very close look at themselves and their behaviour. So that's what people are saying. Let's now go to this message.
Well, firstly, I want to talk about freedom, because freedom is so valuable, yet so vulnerable. Freedom is so precious, yet we all took it for granted. And let's never forget that our forefathers, they fought, they suffered, they died to protect our freedoms so that we could live in an open, free democracy. They fought against autocrats, dictators, control freaks. Does that sound familiar? We want to live free to run our own lives. Freedom from our children having to wear musty masks. Freedom from the anxiety of social distancing. Freedom to run our own businesses, to open new companies, to employ people. Freedom is so precious, so valuable. Free from lockdowns. We want the freedom to be able to get married, the freedom to sing, to dance, the freedom to hug each other without being told how to do so carefully by the BBC. These freedoms are our fundamental right. The freedom to educate our children in schools, not looking at some screen. The freedom to go to university and go to lectures and not be cooped up in prisons. These freedoms are our fundamental rights. We want them back, and never, ever again must we allow our freedoms to be taken away from us. So I repeat, freedoms, it's so valuable, yet so vulnerable, so precious, but we took it for granted.
Freedom so valuable, yet so vulnerable. Wise words indeed. If you are enjoying this broadcast, and we are the only people bringing you any coverage, which is extraordinary given the numbers of people in London, then please log on to this website. It's reformtv.uk/march, reformtv.uk/march, and there you'll be able to chip in a few quid to help fund this production. It's really important that we actually provide balanced coverage in this country. I always believed, as someone who's worked in television for nearly 30 years or over 30 years, that not quite 30 years, but for someone who's worked in broadcasting for a long, long time, I thought we had a fair, impartial media. I'm beginning to doubt that. So we are the only ones showing you what is really going on in central London. And those pictures from the helicopter are simply extraordinary. Thousands of people. Actually, Richard's just messaged me to say he believes that there are at least, from what he can gather, he says at least 100,000 people, if not more. And that's all he can see. So it will be very interesting to see what the final numbers are. Just to put that into perspective, for that People's Vote on the 20th of October 2018, that was 250,000, and the People's Vote demanding a second Brexit referendum, 300,000. Now, those figures were corroborated by independent experts, so we'll be very interested to see how many people are actually attending today's march. But I think the most important takeaway is that they are real people that are attending this, people who are fed up, who are frustrated, who have also been played by the government, such as when people booked holidays to Portugal and the government then suddenly changed the rules and everyone had to get back, costing them hundreds if not thousands of pounds. Totally unfair. What happened to the Green Watch list? The government seems to make some very odd decisions, it seems to me. Right, so from here, let's now go and see, have we got any views in the sky at the moment? We'll go to Calvin on the street. Here's Calvin.
Hello, David. I am at the entrance to Hyde Park here. This is where the protest started. This is where most people joined the protest. They walked all the way around the park, around the long way, took through Marble Arch into Oxford Circus, and most people are now down the bottom of Oxford Circus. But as you can see, there's still loads and loads of people just joining at the beginning, or rather at the end of the march here. So that's how busy it's been today. We're here on this lovely Union flag bus. If you happen to drive past, more people have been honking their horns today in the sign of freedom. You see people holding protest banners out of their windows. So even people who are only here protesting are getting involved. And everyone is friendly, even people who are walking by. Random civilians are saying hello, congratulations, thank you, stand up for freedom, etc. We've reached a point now where the most ordinary folks have had enough of this, have had enough of this. And I think it doesn't really matter how much hypocrisy we're seeing from the government, it doesn't really matter how arbitrary these restrictions are. The government should never have the right to impose dictates to this degree.
In Robinson reporting for us, as you can see, the signal from the broadcast kit that we're using is breaking up, but the reason for that is quite simple, that there are thousands of people. Richard Tice estimating over 100,000 people. They're all using cell phones, and when that happens, of course, the networks get congested, and it doesn't matter who you are, but obviously it congests those signals as well. So an extraordinary day, really. I think, you know, the point is that people are angry, and as a doctor, one of the things that I do want to point out is that it does seem to me that the NHS, we did what we were told to protect the NHS right at the beginning, and the whole point of this exercise was to ensure that we bought time. That was all it was ever going to do. The problem is lockdowns don't do anything. All they ever do is they flatten the curve, but the area under the curve remains the same. So we bought time to get the vaccine. People have been incredible going to get that vaccine, but the collateral damage is extraordinary, and I'll tell you what's going on. We're now seeing 3 times as many admissions to hospital for children with other respiratory illnesses, because the kids haven't seen any respiratory illnesses because they've been cooped up with masks on them. So we're seeing RSV, bronchiolitis, rhinovirus soaring. We're seeing more flu than we are COVID in hospitals. We've got 4.5 million people waiting for elective procedures. And I think one of the most awful statistics is 40,000 plus people waiting to start treatment for cancer. It is not acceptable. These are people's lives. It has to stop. And that is also in addition to those people who are dying of heart disease and of other conditions because they simply can't see a doctor. It is not acceptable. We do not pay for the National Health System to be a COVID-only service. It needs to stop and stop now. And less than 1% of cases are now in hospital. And I think it's worth remembering that when you read some of the mainstream media. So can we go to Jamie to see if he's had any responses from people, what people are saying at home?
Hi David, yes, lots and lots coming in, lots of pictures and videos just really showing how many people are actually there marching through London today. I believe actually just looking at the sort of chatter on social media that the march has had so many people that they've actually stopped it so that the back end of the march can join up with the front end because there are just that many people there. Lots of people tweeting pictures. Neil Alexander here sharing images of what looks like a very, very populous march. Lots of people out there right now. I'm not sure if you can see my screen right now, but Cake Tin here says, thank you to each and every one of you out there today. Unfortunately, too far to travel from Aberdeenshire, pregnant with young children. My children should be allowed to live without fear or unjustified restrictions. And I think that sort of harks back to what both you and Julia have said already in the course of today's coverage, that these are not activists. You know, no one's, attaching themselves to lampposts. These are normal people who have just had enough. I've got a comment also that came in on YouTube. Thanks for the comments, by the way, that keep coming in on YouTube. Just before I read that, I just wanted to give a little update on the sort of viewership that we're garnering throughout the course of today's broadcast. So more than 1,200 concurrent live viewers and 488 likes. So I think that just gives you an idea of the public's response to today's march and indeed coverage of today's march. So let me just bring you that comment here, which I will leave you with, David. So it's from Anna Phillips, who says, anyone else that doesn't believe in coincidences find it pure comedy that the Hancock story broke just in time to be a huge distraction. Have you got any thoughts on that, David? Because looking across the broadcasters' front pages, it's all Hancock and no Freedom March.
I know, I think it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, obviously, that story broke late last night about Hancock, and I'm used to stories and salacious stories, and the Matt Hancock one really does take the biscuit. Let's go to the helicopter now. Let's see these live pictures and talk to Richard Tice. Richard, can you hear me? So as you can see, Richard, now it's fantastic we've got signal back, but as you can see, a very, as we keep hearing from all our commentators, a very good-natured protest, people walking. You can see the lanyards there. These are...
David, can you hear me from the eye in the sky? I can see there are huge crowds now strengthening the length of Regent Street down Oxford Street. You've obviously lost me again, Chris.
No, we can hear you loud and clear, Richard.
That's the delay. There's a 20-second delay. Keep going, keep going.
Do you want me to keep talking, Chris?
Yeah, we want you to keep talking, Richard. I can hear you. The director can hear you.
Just beginning to get down towards Piccadilly Circus. There are tens and tens and tens of thousands of of the tens of thousands of people streaming down Regent Street, still on Oxford Street. I think the length of the whole march, I would now estimate, based on our calculations, would be just under 2 miles long from the start, which is now heading down towards Piccadilly Circus, to the back of the march, which is still at the west end of Oxford Street. And what is absolutely clear to me is that whilst the mainstream media have deliberately refused to talk about these marches, which have been growing in size and scale in recent months, that's the reason why we decided that if they weren't going to cover it, then we would cover it ourselves. And I think what people are clearly seeing is freedom fighters and liberty lovers have had enough. They've had enough of these unjustified restrictions, and they've had enough of the hypocrisy of cabinet ministers, prime minister, other ministers who say one thing and frankly do completely different. And we've had the media, haven't we? They've been sneering at the small scale. They've been.
So we've obviously just lost Richard. Let's see these pictures, as you've seen, coming in live across London. So tens of thousands, as Richard says, possibly even more, hundreds of thousands of people just making a very peaceful protest, saying they've had enough. Let's go to the bus now and have a look at what the scene is there. Now, the bus is actually parked at Marble Arch, and at the moment, as you can see, so there are still people there. I mean, that's extraordinary. So we're basically, as Richard says, it's now, this march is extending from Marble Arch all the way down Oxford Street, down Regent Street to Piccadilly Circus. Now, one interesting fact for you, if that march really is 2 miles long, that is longer than the People's Vote March was in its whole entirety. And the nice thing is that, of course, at the moment, the scenes that we are seeing are very pleasant, that people are behaving well and there is a carnival-like atmosphere, and that's really, really important. So that is, and these are the scenes live from central London, from our helicopter in the sky. We are the only ones with a helicopter. We are the only broadcasters who are bringing you live pictures of the right to protest. That is, we are meant to be the seat of democracy, and that democracy has been shattered. So these are live pictures coming in from central London, and people just saying, look, I've had enough, I need my life back. As Julia Hartley-Brewer said, I don't want the new normal, I want the old normal. I like the one where we could go and have a beer, where you could hug people and kiss your family. It's, the government has, I'm afraid, got a rather power hungry, and we need desperately to reform the whole track and trace system. Interestingly, I've had a run-in with them, and they even bang on your door to check where you are, which, quite frankly, for someone who's been double jabbed and had 2 PCRs and an antigen test, is ridiculous. What a waste of resources. And there's some quite nice facts about that. In fact, 691 million lateral flow tests were given out between March and May. And of those, 14% were used. Well, that's an excellent use of money, isn't it, the government? Very good. And at the moment, test and trace, or trick and treat as I'm calling them, about 150,000 people are being told every week to self-isolate. What a waste of time. Right, these are live pictures coming in from central London. These, as you can see, slightly grainy pictures, but that's to be expected just given the numbers there. Actually, I think it's quite nice to see that people are back in London. I've been there over the last few weeks, and it's really been a ghost town, a shadow of its former self. And that is a major problem going forward. How do we rebuild business? How do we make sure that businesses can survive? And I'm not talking about the big multinationals. I'm really talking about the coffee shops, the people who have sandwich shops. Those shops are going to really struggle if people in offices don't go back to work. So it's really important that we get people back to work. So you're watching Freedom March Live. This is live coverage from the only broadcaster showing you what's going on in central London. This is an extraordinary day that we have to pay to broadcast to you what is really going on in your capital city, where the mainstream news outlets are ignoring it. It is not acceptable. The government should be held to account. This is about democracy. Or, if Richard Tice is right, It's about money.
There's an expression I use, follow the money. And when all of us, amongst our friends, our work colleagues, we ask ourselves, why have these supposedly intelligent, smart prime ministers, cabinet ministers, scientists, why are they making these utterly illogical decisions? And you think, why are they doing this? Why are they continuing to ignore the data that they promised us would drive everything? And I say, follow the money, because the money involved in this COVID response here in the UK is unbelievable. It's billions and billions of pounds and billions of profits being made by big companies. So let's just remind ourselves. Do you remember the joy at the vaccination being approved? And we were told, cancel Christmas to save Easter. We were told when the 70s and the vulnerable and those who need shielding are vaccinated, we could cry freedom. And yet then, no, sorry, just a few more weeks. Vaccinate the over 50s. And then Easter's gone to save the summer. And then, no, we've got to vaccinate all the adults. And you think, why? We were told it was the 70s, the 50s. And then all the adults is not enough. Now they're saying, we've got to vaccinate all our children. Hang on, folks. What's going on here? And then the new language, have you heard it? No one's safe until everyone's safe, all over the world. And then here it comes again. It's like painting the Forth Bridge. They're talking about booster jabs for the first lot that were vaccinated all those months ago. You see what's happening? It never ends. It never ends. And why? The money. Big Pharma is making billions of pounds profits by selling vaccines. Big Pharma and the testing companies are making billions of profits by testing 1 million tests a day of people all over the country, including our children, who don't get ill with this disease, who don't suffer from this disease, and with a tiny, tiny number of exceptions, who don't die from this disease. Follow the money, and that provides the answers as to why they're doing this. The scientists, the merry-go-round, with the research grants, the universities, the quangos, the non-exec directorships are back in the big pharma companies. It's a massive merry-go-round for the elite. They're the ones who are earning the cash, the money, the joy, the exposure, the publicity. Follow the money, and that answers why this is going on, and it has to stop.
It really does have to stop. Rich and I have spoken about this at length. There are many other treatments that we've covered in another programme called Tice Talk, looking at ivermectin, for example. Why is it that we talked about this 3, 4, 5 months ago and the government's only just decided to look at it? It's a cheap drug, it's used across the world, and we know it is useful in the treatment of COVID-19. Other drugs, dexamethasone, do you remember that was actually very useful? Again, was discounted initially. And we've also got brand new drugs coming online as well, like tocilizumab and various other immunosuppressive drugs that I think will show enormous promise. So I hope Richard's wrong, and I hope it isn't all about the money. I think also Oxford Astra, remember, they were selling those at cost, so that's great. Just if you have joined us, let's go to the sky. This is Freedom March Live. We're giving you live coverage across London of the march that is currently taking place. Here are live pictures, as you can see, the Millennium Wheel there at the London Eye. And you can see these are live pictures coming from the helicopter from Richard Tice, who is there. So we were saying that we believe that there are 100,000 plus, maybe many more people lining the route of this march, a peaceful march, a march of people from all walks of life, people who are worried about their families, worried about how to pay their mortgage. And I think that's one thing the government hasn't quite grasped, is it's all very well if you're a minister and you have a salary. If you're self-employed and you can't work because of the government's ridiculous rules, you can't actually make any money. And how do you pay your mortgage? How do you pay for your car? This has to stop. We've been stuck in this kind of strange world for far too long, and that's why people are marching in London today. Beautiful scenes across London, as you can see, obviously a nice sunny day there. We do closer coverage. We're just trying to get closer again because the way that we transmit our pictures back uses a particular type of signal, but just the sheer numbers of people who are lining those streets in London and on that march, that 7.57 kilometre march, 4.7 miles. There's the man himself, Richard Tice. He always fancied himself as an action man. There he is, as he goes across London in our helicopter. I find it extraordinary, actually, that the news outlets who have helicopters or the ability to use helicopters are not covering this march at all. But, of course, they did cover the People's Vote March, the one, if you remember, when 52% of people voted for Brexit, they then decided to cover the march where people wanted a second referendum. But they can't be bothered to cover this one. So those are live pictures that are coming in from above central London. Huge numbers of people, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who are joining that march. Let's go and hear from people across the country. I'm in the east of England because I've been quarantined. Jamie Lowe is in the west of England in our social media hub. You're not in quarantine, but what are people saying?
I'm absolutely not in quarantine, and I think sales of aviator sunglasses have skyrocketed after that little cameo from our very own Richard Tice there in the sky. So yes, lots and lots of conversation happening on social media. Not everybody is in favour of today's event, but you know, there are several people out there, as we've seen already, and they have been tweeting and sharing images and evidence of what's going on, because of course, like you've said, David, we can't see much of that if we head to Sky News, LBC even, in fact, or the BBC. Lots of broadcasters ignoring today's event, but thank God for citizen journalism, because we've got lots of evidence coming in across social media. Hashtag Freedom March if you want to share your opinions and views. I'll be reading them out throughout the course of today's programme, but let's just go through a few of them that we've had coming in so far. So Julia tweeted some of the images that we've been sharing of the march that's happening so far, and I've been looking at the responses that Julia got to the images that she shared from our helicopter. Ben here says, and the impact on people's freedom to enjoy their day, impact on businesses forced to close for protection or having reduced footfall. So Ben there obviously concerned about the impact of today's event, maybe ignoring the impact of the many hundreds of days of restrictions that those businesses that he's talking about there have had to endure. Mark here says, massive freedom march in London, but unless you're on social media, you wouldn't know about it. Complete silence from TV news stations, obviously not newsworthy. TV news not fit for purpose. Crypto Times here says, it's funny how no mainstream media outlets have run anything on the Freedom March today, despite thousands turning up. I'm sure we will get the number of cases and deaths today, though, probably as percentages, to keep scaring the public into compliance. And then I'm just gonna show you this footage. Hopefully you can see my screen at this point. No, I've just seen that the system's crashed, but what I was trying to show you there is some footage from Julia Hartley-Brewer, again, who's out there in the thick of the march with showing just, you know, how many people are there. So that march is going to be continuing throughout the day. So does this coverage, and so do your opinions, thoughts and views. So do keep them coming in. Hashtag Freedom March. And David, I think what we're seeing here is real evidence that social media, as we've seen in many other parts of the world, is giving the average person a voice with matters as important as this one.
I think you're absolutely right, Jamie. I think people are fed up of being fed the same nonsense by the mainstream media. The reason I was distracted, I've just been asked by various media outlets what we're doing, and would I go on and talk to the media outlets about the protest taking place today. So maybe people are actually watching in those newsrooms and thinking, well, maybe we should have had a helicopter. So I'm quite enjoying that. Thank you very much for the moment, Jamie. So we are now... we are the only broadcaster showing you what's really going on in central London. Now, you can get involved and you can help us by giving a few quid to help us with our broadcasting costs, because this is not a cheap operation. You can do that at reformtv.uk/march. That's reformtv.uk/march. All the money goes to funding this broadcast and funding the dissemination of democracy, making sure that you know what is going on in your country, because the mainstream media won't show you. And it's really important that someone does. So there we can see now live pictures from the helicopter above central London. It has become incredibly difficult, I know, for them to get proper signals because just of the sheer whamming those streets. And as Jamie was just saying, we've got Julia Hartley-Brewer showing us amazing coverage. Martin Daubney's actually sent me, a former MEP, he sent me a video just showing the good-natured event taking place and the fact that just there are thousands of people down there protesting peacefully, which is what we believe in. And I do think, just for those people who say, well, they're being really irresponsible because they could spread COVID, the point is that actually we've vaccinated so many people now. Over 60% of the adult population had 2 vaccines. Over 80% of adults have now had 1 vaccine. We're way ahead of those original goalposts that the government put in. Do you remember? And it was all about data, not dates, but obviously it's now not about either of them. So the government seems to be making things up as it goes along, and as we've also seen, it's one rule for them and it's one rule for us. We started with Dominic Cummings, who went for a very strange eye test. Then, of course, we had Michael Gove, who was told by Test and Trace to self-isolate and then came up with some ridiculous idea of how he could get round that. And now, of course, we've got Matt Hancock, who's been caught in a very compromising position, not only breaking his own rules, but it seems from the lawyers this morning that he's broken the law too. And the law should apply to everyone, regardless of who they are. These are live pictures coming in from London. So you can see there, in the middle of your screen, I believe, the march that's taking place in central London. This is the Freedom March live. This is our helicopter, and we're just trying to get a bit lower so we can give you a sense of the scale of this. So the protesters have started at Hyde Park Corner, have gone up to Oxford Street, coming down Regent Street. We think there's somewhere now around Piccadilly Circus, Trafalgar Square. There's obviously Horse Guards Parade there on the right. Admiralty Arch, which is there, which you can just see at the bottom right. And there are quite extraordinary pictures coming in. So then the march, as you can see, look, there we are. Look at the numbers of people there, and that is obviously Piccadilly Circus, lit up, those amazing, what were neon boards now, LED boards, but the numbers of people there. Let's go to Calvin Robinson now, who is on board the bus at Hyde Park Corner to see what people are making of what's going on this afternoon.
Hello, David. I'm right here walking down Trafalgar Square. I've managed to cut off the protest and meet them at the front. Here with Lawrence Fox. How's it been going today, Lawrence?
It's going well, Cal. It's going very, very well.
How's the crowd been?
The crowd is, as always, very lovely, very polite, very courteous. If you're in a crowd like this before, your phone would have been taken off you, but not by this one. They're lovely.
It's very jovial, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a happy, peaceful, huge, lovely, amazing march.
If you had to pin this down to one cause, what would you say it was?
It's just about freedom, man. It's just about we need our freedom back, and that's it. That's what it is. It doesn't belong to the government, and it's specifically the government that don't make their rules, their COVID measures that they force on us. Cowardly bastards, a lot of them.
Try and give you a view of what's going on around here, guys. As you can see, it's absolutely mental. We've got people from all over with lots and lots of different causes.
Very good-natured protest indeed. So live pictures coming in from central London of a march that apparently doesn't exist and doesn't take place because no mainstream media is covering it. If you want to continue watching this, please give us a couple of quid. You can do that by going to reformtv.uk/march, reformtv.uk/march, just maybe the price of a pint. It's really important that we see what's going on in our capital city. We need to see what real people think, not what these politicians in Westminster, many of whom seem to have very double standards as it transpires, that they say one thing in public and do quite another. I'd like to also understand how UEFA are allowed to come in and not quarantine. Live pictures from Richard Tice now coming in on our helicopter above central London. Can we hear Richard? No, Richard cannot be heard, but they're beautiful. I do think, actually, of all the cities, I am biased, but I do think London is a fantastically beautiful city. It's a vibrant city, it's multicultural, it's got everything. And one of the sectors that was hit incredibly hard was the theatrical sector, and I feel desperately sorry, particularly for friends in theatre. They've not worked for nearly 15, 16 months, and of course that means they have no income, and the theatres are really struggling. And even Andrew Lloyd Webber, obviously, with Cameron Mackintosh now trying to take the government to court because of the draconian restrictions that have been imposed. And I think the question for me is either these vaccines work or they don't work. And if they don't work, why did we give them to everyone? And the evidence is overwhelming. We look at both Oxford and Pfizer, and the reduction is 92% in terms of hospitalisation. That was the original idea. You will never eradicate COVID. It is not possible, in the same way you never eradicate flu. I think it would be quite useful if someone in government had a medical degree. And I think also there's one other point, which is that politicians are there to make political judgments. Scientists are there to advise, and scientists are naturally cautious. You should take what the scientists tell you and then apply political leadership, something very sadly lacking. Live shots there from London. You can hear Richard. Can we hear Richard? So we have live pictures coming in showing central London. It's tricky to make out the scale of the march, but obviously, as we've heard, tens of thousands, if not more. So live pictures across London. We also have some other reporters on the street. Now, I know we're also struggling to get signal back just because of the numbers of people that are there. So those are the latest images coming in from central London. There we are. You can see thousands of people. Now, that looks to me like Regent Street, I believe. I think that is Regent Street. Where it comes down to Haymarket. I think that's Piccadilly Circus there. Yes, it is. It's Piccadilly Circus. So look, thousands of people there. Those are brilliant shots. So we've got Regent Street. There on the left with the LED screens is Piccadilly Circus. And now they're coming down from there, down Haymarket towards Trafalgar Square. So people have completely underestimated the scale of this march. There are thousands. I mean, I can see that from here. There are tens of thousands of people marching in protest at government policy because people are saying, you know, enough's enough. We've had enough. And I quite frankly don't blame them. You know, our vaccine rollout has been extraordinary. What we do know is that there are certain groups that have been resistant to vaccination, and I think, you know, the key is to make sure that as many people who can have it and will have it, do have it. That's the key to this. We need to get back to normal, and I think the government is squandering political capital. We have a world-beating, as we've heard, world-beating pharmaceutical sector in this country. We made the vaccines, we immunise more people than Europe, and what we should be doing is getting on with business, and we aren't doing that, and it's not acceptable. And we are wasting time. Look at these thousands of people now in central London making a peaceful protest saying enough is enough. They have had enough of being told what to do by government, when the government has very odd double standards indeed. So there's Piccadilly Circus, and then they will be heading from Piccadilly Circus down Haymarket, and you can see just the sheer numbers now that have joined. And in fact, I was told that the march had been slowed down to allow the back of the line to catch up with the front. So extraordinary numbers of people down there, as you can see, and they are now going down Haymarket from Piccadilly Circus. And we are the only broadcaster showing you these pictures. I think it's really important that we do that. So if you want to help by chipping in a few quid, please do so. reformtv.uk/march. reformtv.uk/march. This is Freedom March Live, the only broadcaster bringing you live pictures of a peaceful this government. And the opposition. The opposition have been absolutely hopeless. I thought the point of an opposition was to be opposed, but clearly not in the case of Labour. I believe, I think everyone can see that they that actually there is little between them. The fact is, its government are out on the streets. Have a look at this.
As we all ask ourselves, why the Cabinet, why the Prime Minister are making these illogical decisions based on the incredibly good data that we all see in front of ourselves, I say to you, follow the money. Just think back. The joy of the vaccine programme being approved. Cancel Christmas to save Easter as we vaccinate the over 70s, the vulnerable, those who need shielding, and then we can cry freedom. And then it changed. We've got to vaccinate just a few more weeks to vaccinate the over 50s. And then just a few more weeks, cancel Easter to save summer as we vaccinate all adults. There's a lot of money, a lot of profits being made here, folks, as they sell more and more vaccines. And then it's all of a sudden, we've got to vaccinate all the children. That's the discussion now. And then the new language coming in, no one's safe till everyone's safe around the whole world. The language is changing. The goalposts have moved off the pitch. They've moved beyond the car park next door to the stadium. The goalposts have moved into the sea as they say, no one's safe till we've vaccinated everybody around the whole world. And of course, that's a lot of money. And the testing, billions of pounds profits being made as they test 1 million people a day here in the UK. And then all of a sudden, it's a bit like painting.
So there we are, live helicopter shots that are coming in. We just interrupted Richard to show you these shots. It's incredibly difficult to get really good pictures just because of the numbers of people on the street. And obviously each person, or many people, will have cell phones and they take up the bandwidth. So it is quite extraordinary. But we can see thousands of people taking to the march, a march that the police have downplayed. People said they wouldn't come. And of course, we're seeing thousands of people on this march, if not hundreds of thousands. Live pictures now coming in from our helicopter. So Horse Guards Parade there. And we are then approaching the embankment. There's the embankment. So we're expecting people then to come down the embankment. As I keep saying, I think it's going to get a bit interesting when they reach the Westminster and the Houses of Parliament, of course, the very place that enacted these draconian laws, as I said right at the beginning, that have never been used in peacetime. The Coronavirus Act 2020 essentially stripped everyone of every freedom, and it built on existing acts, but it didn't go far enough. So they used a Public Health Act, but they then had to bring in the Coronavirus Act as well. So really extraordinary. Even the Civil Contingencies Act wasn't enough for the powers that they wanted. And of course, then it seems they flaunt their own rules. Matt Hancock having a nice cuddle with one of his staff. We've also got UEFA, 2,500 officials that apparently can pop into the country without quarantining, that seems ridiculous, or being tested. And of course the G7 posing as though we would expect them with masks and elbow bumping and behind closed doors at a barbecue and air kissing and kissing each other. I mean, really just not acceptable. I mean, it is not acceptable for politicians to dictate laws and not stick to them. So here are live shots. Look at these incredible shots coming in. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, I would think at this rate, tens of thousands certainly, coming down here. That is, I believe, coming down, I'm just trying to get my bearings here. So that would be Piccadilly. So coming down there, I'm a bit lost as to where I am. But anyway, thousands of people in central London. It's quite interesting, actually, when you look at public health measures generally, that people have been very cross about the fact that the vaccine, it is not compulsory, by the way, to have a vaccine. We do not believe in compulsory vaccination. But what is interesting is that actually there have been some quite pivotal times in British history where legislation was enacted which save lives. Seatbelts, I think, is quite a good example of that. When I was young, I remember being in a car without a seatbelt. I mean, we would no more do that now than you know, fly through the air. One of the other things that people still don't really understand of this country have fluorinated water. Now, that was added to improve people's dental health, and again, that's something that I think not many people are aware of. And of course, drink driving is another very good example of how we used to behave, and then drink driving laws changed, so we would not drive if we'd been drinking. I think what's going to be very interesting is what happens with the COVID vaccine. So there's Trafalgar Square now below us. Thousands of people, I mean absolutely thousands of people are lining that route, marching in a peaceful protest, saying to the government, look, enough is enough. If you look at the roadmap out of this, oh yes, data not dates, or not as it seems, we should have been out of this. On the 21st of June, that's this Monday just gone, all legal limits should have been removed. Nightclubs should have opened, but we're not. We're stuck in limbo. Jamie Lowe, you're in Bristol, you're in our social media hub. I know a lot of people from across the country are very angry about the situation that they're in. I'm in East Anglia, Jamie's in Bristol. As you can see, we've got live footage coming in from London. So Jamie, what's the mood out there in the rest of the United Kingdom?
Well, I think on the whole, quite a lot of support for the march which is going on today, or at least that's what I'm seeing. I'm really struggling, although I've brought a few opposing tweets and opinions up throughout the course of today's coverage. It is quite a struggle to find them and keep, you know, my little social media station as balanced as possible. But you know, we've, as well as our well-known faces that we've got out there on the march today, there's a few other famous faces. So I mentioned earlier that the Freds from Right Said Fred are there today. They have had a picture with a fan. I'm also seeing that Gillian McKeith of You Are What You Eat fame, she is there right now. She looks like, I mean, she's quite a small lady, Gillian McKeith, but she appears to have found herself a little vantage point and got a really nice sort of vista of the march as it's progressing. But yeah, loads of pictures coming in, just loads of evidence, really, of what's going on today in London. Hopefully, you know, we won't be the only ones that are covering today's march. Hopefully we'll see some evidence of what went on today on our national mainstream media broadcasters too. But yeah, so loads of things coming in. Keep them coming. Keep your comments coming. They're flooding in on YouTube almost so fast that I can't really keep up and read them all. But you know, we're reaching people today, and I think that's the main thing. I think was one of the reasons that maybe the only reason that we decided to do this, to bring this coverage to the people. More than 1,000 people have been tuned in to our YouTube stream since the programme started, and it's not dropped below 1,000 since we've been on air. So really reaching the people today. 742 likes on YouTube, so keep those likes coming in. If you do have an opinion, comment or view that you'd like to be shared on air, then all you have to do is tweet with the hashtag Freedom March, and I'll bring that to David and the rest of the crew here today throughout the course of today's coverage. David, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jamie. I think you're absolutely right. I think people are delighted that we are broadcasting. It's been very difficult for us to get the word out about what we are broadcasting because the powers that be are very keen that we don't broadcast to you. So if you'd like to chip in a couple of quid to help pay for this coverage, which we are paying for ourselves, then please do so. The address for that is reformtv.uk/March. And I can tell you, we've raised £8,000, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much to every single person who's lobbed in a couple of quid. It's really important that we can bring you that. I've just been told some breaking news, which I think is rather hilarious. Having told you that we're the only one with a helicopter up in the air, the BBC have now dispatched a helicopter. The power of our programme. I've also just had other news outlets asking me to do interviews. So clearly the media is watching what we're doing. We are the only broadcaster showing live footage of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in central London marching for freedom. And quite rightly, because I think people have had enough. I find it extraordinary. One of the sectors that I think has been hit particularly hard is travel. And I spoke to some people in the travel industry. You know, we were meant to have this green, amber and red list, and of course the government now has put 14 destinations back on the green list, but not really. They put them on the green watch list, and so really the only place you can go at the moment is Malta, which is very nice. Malta's a very nice place, but that may not be where you want to go. There's still no decision on the double jabbed people and whether they need to quarantine. And by the way, since I've been on air, I've just been messaged by Test and Trace again. It's turning into some sort of dictatorial state, and I'm expecting them to bang on the door at any minute. I think there's one other thing that's, and with my political head on, the EU is now very angry with the way that our vaccine rollout has been carried out. It's, you know, we've done an extraordinary job in vaccinating over 60% of all adults with both vaccines, and the EU is nowhere near that. And of course, they're now playing up this indecision by the government about the Delta variant. Well, let me tell you, the Delta variant is not an issue for all people who are vaccinated because it protects against hospitalisations, but the EU doesn't want to hear it. And that will suit its own ends. And we know all about the EU. These are live shots coming in from Westminster now. I can see thousands of people there. Let's just take a closer look at what is going on. These are live shots out of the helicopter with Richard Tice on board. So extraordinary. Thank you very much. I've just seen that we have raised even more money. So thank you if you've just lobbed in those couple of quid. Can I have some money as well for a beer? So these are live shots of over central London showing People's March live. This is Horse Guards, Downing Street, Whitehall. There we are, Horse Guards Parade there, the sandy coloured bit there. So the picture's frozen for a moment, but you get a real sense of what's going on, and the fact, I still find it absolutely extraordinary that the mainstream media is not covering this, or maybe they'll start to do it. So live pictures here. So I'm just getting my bearings here. That's Trafalgar Square. There's our Admiralty Arch. So do we have any estimate on numbers of people taking part? We've heard Richard Tice believing there are over 100,000, but it would be extraordinary. Let's just remind ourselves of those numbers that we've seen before. Just, you know, if it was, say, 200,000 people, then it is quite frankly outrageous that the mainstream media is not covering it. Do you remember there was a huge amount of coverage of the October 2018 People's Vote March, which was the referendum on the final Brexit deal. That got huge coverage. So did the People's Vote for the second Brexit referendum. But this one doesn't. So here's the map of where people are. They started on this green dot on the left there, which is at Hyde Park Corner, and went up Park Lane all the way to Marble Arch, which is where our bus is sitting with Calvin Robinson, and then they marched down Oxford Street, all the way down there to Oxford Circus, at which point they turned right and went down Regent Street. And from Regent Street, that takes you into Piccadilly Circus. And we saw the pictures of the LED screens, and then from Piccadilly Circus down through Haymarket. And we also saw the crowds amassing in Trafalgar Square, and then starting to move down the embankment. Now, from my point of view, and when we were talking about doing this programme, I still maintain that I think a potential problem might be Westminster and marching outside the Houses of Parliament. I know the police probably are on high alert for any sort of signs of a struggle or violence, but actually the mood, from what we've heard from Calvin, the mood we've heard from Richard, is actually extremely nice and extremely friendly. So it's been extraordinary showing those live pictures of thousands of people marching through London and no coverage whatsoever on mainstream news. And I've just checked again, nothing at all. So that's the route of the march. Let's hear from Richard once again.
As we all ask ourselves, why the Cabinet, why the Prime Minister are making these illogical decisions based on the incredibly good data that we all see in front of ourselves, I say to you, follow the money. Just think back. The joy of the vaccine programme being approved. Cancel Christmas to save Easter as we vaccinate the over 70s, the vulnerable, those who need shielding, and then we can cry freedom. And then it changed. We've got to vaccinate just a few more weeks to vaccinate the over 50s. And then just a few more weeks, cancel Easter to save summer as we vaccinate all adults. There's a lot of money, a lot of profits being made here, folks, as they sell more and more vaccines. And then it's all of a sudden, we've got to vaccinate all the children. That's the discussion now. And then the new language coming in, no one's safe till everyone's safe around the whole world. The language is changing. The goalposts have moved off the pitch. They've moved beyond the car park next door to the stadium. The goalposts have moved into the sea as they say, no one's safe till we've vaccinated everybody around the whole world. And of course, that's a lot of money. And the testing, billions of pounds profits being made as they test 1 million people a day here in the UK. And then all of a sudden, it's a bit like painting the Forth Bridge, isn't it? You vaccinated everybody, and then the people at the front need booster jabs. And then we'll all need boosters. Do you see? It never ends. It never ends until we, the people, say enough. Enough of wasting our money unnecessarily. Enough.
Enough is enough. We were told it's data, not dates. But, you know, the government did set out that roadmap. I just want to remind you, and I've got them on my calendar, actually, in my office, because it's been extraordinary trying to live through this as someone who is self-employed, just trying to work out how you make a living. And I know many people are in that same position. If you remember, on the 8th of March, schools could go back and you could meet one person. And, of course, there was, I think, the biggest problem has been the discharge of patients from hospital into the care homes. Now, one question that comes up time and time again was that we built all these Nightingale hospitals. Whatever happened to them? They were never used. The one at Excel in London, I don't believe, never saw a single patient. On the 19th of March, the rule of 6 was introduced. Outdoor sport could start. And the stay-at-home was no longer legally enforced. On the 12th of April, and I remember this vividly because I think it was a Monday. It was a Monday because pubs could open outdoors, and so I took full advantage of that and ran to the pub at the end of my road. Because it's really important that we support local businesses that have really struggled throughout this time. Hairdressers, yes, that was the end of cutting your own hair. We've got pictures now of Trafalgar Square. On the 17th of May, pubs indoors were allowed to open and the rule of 6 applied. Live pictures now, Trafalgar Square. And, oh yes, so Piccadilly Circus. And on the 21st of June, that's the Monday just gone, that is when these were meant to stop. So these are live pictures coming in from Trafalgar Square or Piccadilly Circus. From Piccadilly Circus, it looks like to me. So it is good-natured. I mean, I know one of the other worries, there we are, people marching, good, great shots of people marching. This is Freedom March Live. This is people saying that they have had enough. And we are dispatching a reporter there now, and our cameraman is jostling with the public to make sure that they can get a good signal there. It's been really difficult for us to get signal because just of the sheer numbers of people. I mean, I know some people will have a problem with this number of people in close proximity, but the data is very clear, which is that actually we've vaccinated 60% of the population with 2 vaccines. The rates are very low. I think the media is playing a game with the Delta variant, which actually is now all over Europe. And the point is that both the Astra and the Pfizer vaccines prevent against the Delta vaccine putting people in hospital. And that was always the key to this. This was always the key. And it seems to me that there are huge shifting goalposts going on. You know, one minute you're told one thing, then you're told another. And I think that, you know, the government is behaving like a very bad parent when you promise a child something and then you completely disregard what you promised them. And it does also feel like all pigs are not necessarily equal with the behaviour of certain government officials, like Dominic Cummings, like, for example, Michael Gove, and most recently Matt Hancock, who will be thrilled with that CCTV footage that is now playing out across all of the news outlets. It will be very interesting to see if Matt Hancock keeps his job. Now, the Prime Minister has said he has full confidence in Matt Hancock. And in my humble experience, that means that he's for the chop. So we shall see. And then, of course, the UEFA, the fact is you can have 2,500 people coming into the country that don't have to abide by any of the same rules. I'm particularly incensed by the G7 that are allowed in without testing, that kiss each other. And as someone who's had 2 immunisations and an antigen test and 2 PCRs, it is not acceptable for Track and Trace to keep banging on my door. Live pictures from the helicopter now, as you can see, that's Piccadilly. I believe that's Piccadilly. Yes, there we are. There's Piccadilly Circus there. You can see what were those what were the neon signs that I remember from my youth. Of course, have been replaced by LED screens. Completely different live scenes now. This is Piccadilly Circus. Our cameraman Dave is there. These are live pictures coming into us. Do we have a reporter there as well to give us a sense of what's going on? People standing around. I mean, it actually, you know, on the upside, I think it's rather wonderful to see London with people in it. And I think there is a temptation to try and run and hide from this virus. We will never get rid of the virus. And I think we have to learn to live with risk. Risk is endemic. And actually, there's some great statistics that I read somewhere. Yes, here we are. The chance of you dying today is 1 in 42,000. The chance of you dying with COVID today is 1 in 3.5 million. So what are we doing? Why are we locking down the country? And actually, deaths from all causes are 20% lower than normal. And so it just seems to me that the government is dithering, it's lost its political capital. We had an amazing rollout, we have an amazing rollout of the vaccine, and the volunteers who've done that have done an absolutely brilliant job of rolling out that vaccine. But we really need, we need more people to have the vaccine. There are particular worries about certain groups, particularly younger people coming forward, although I think that's starting to change, and people in multi-generational households. So live pictures coming back in from the helicopter. So I'm just trying to familiarise myself with where we are. So extraordinary. I mean, for me, the priceless bit about this whole broadcast has been we started off as the only broadcaster covering it, and now the BBC have sent a helicopter into the sky. Interesting, these are pictures that are coming in live from our cameraman on the street. Not only, I've just had Talk Radio on the phone as well, just saying, could I comment on what we're doing? And very, funnily enough, Talk Radio want to run our footage. Well, they certainly can. We'll talk to them. But this is what it takes. It takes a broadcaster like us to take the initiative and take the risk. Now, if you want to chip in and help fund what we're doing, because it costs an awful lot of money, as you can imagine, you can do that by going to reformtv.uk/march. That's reformtv.uk/march. Chip in a couple of quid, the price of a pint. What we're bringing you is democracy in action. We're bringing you pictures of people from all over the country who have had enough, who've been brilliantly well behaved, and they feel it's desperately unfair. Now, earlier on, I saw Martin Daubney, a former colleague of mine, who was a member in the European Parliament. Now, Martin is out and about in central London, and he was very keen to send us this video back from his phone.
Right at the front here. We are free! We are free! We are free! Right at the front of the march. We are free! They've held it up just long into the back to catch up. We are free! We are free! We are free! We are free! And it's a great atmosphere, peaceful, thousands and thousands of people, as you say, all the way right back down Oxford Street. Right from the front here, let me just go over. There's Lawrence Fox. Lawrence, quickly say hello. Hello. Great atmosphere today, Loza. No aggro whatsoever. Beautiful crowd as ever.
None at all. As always, start hanging out with normal people, which is nice.
It makes a change. It makes a change. We'll walk over here. Here's another great sign, mate. Oh, you sign up, please, sir. Great crowd. Superb atmosphere. Just back it up for a minute so everyone can catch him at the back. It's all the way, the entire length of Oxford Street, and we're moving on again. Here goes the glacier that cannot be stopped.
Really extraordinary scenes there coming from Martin Daubney. So you can see, the mainstream media currently aren't covering it, although, as I've said, I've now been contacted by a number of news outlets wanting to know what we're doing. And if the other rumours are true, the BBC has now sent its own helicopter up to have a helicopter war with us. I thought it was rather good, actually. Yesterday, my director, who's a very clever man, said there are 4 horsemen of the political apocalypse. Hypocrisy, you've definitely seen that, idiocy, complacency and duplicity. Does it remind you of anyone? Jamie Lowe, what are people saying?
Yes, David, lots going on social media. A similar picture as we have seen previously, just lots of people tweeting pictures and videos of what's going on the ground there. But a message from Sarah Costa came in on Twitter for you specifically. She says, I wish Dr. David Bull was our doctor. Glad so many people are seeing the MPs for what they really are. I'll be voting reform from now on. Thank you. You appear to have won yourself a voter there and maybe a client if you opened a family practice once again. William Connolly here says this Freedom March is having the opposite effect. This mass protest is a super spreader event that will cause the restrictions to be in place for longer. If these people really want freedom, they should follow restrictions, keep their distance and wear masks. And then a comment from Torbay Tweets here, who has shared some pictures of what was going on last weekend when the football was, of course, the big story of the day, just highlighting the difference between police activity then and now. I'm not on the ground, so I can't, say what the police are doing. But it might be interesting to see the reaction to last weekend's events, you know, with the football. You've mentioned the football several times today in the programme so far, David, with how the reaction to the march today is happening. But of course, lots to do on social media still. Lots of people still getting in touch with their comments. So do get in touch. Hashtag Freedom March if you want to share your opinions. David, back to you.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Jamie. My Twitter has melted, I have to say, and I just want to say a big thank you to a chap called Joshua Donnell, who says, David, I really appreciate your coverage of this march. Now, I've walked from the front to the back, and he's estimating it at 150,000 people. And he said it's extraordinary, and I think this is the other great thing, it's a wonderful atmosphere. This is about peacefully protesting, about a democratic right, about saying, actually, enough's enough. You know, you told us that if we met certain criteria, then you'd unlock the country, and quite frankly, the government not only is duplicitous, but has lied, and has broken the law, it would appear, according to leading barristers. So that's quite interesting. We have, I think the one about the super spreader event's quite interesting. Well, the answer to that is, masks, in my humble opinion, play a very limited role, which means, in my speak, they don't work. And also, when you've got 60% of the adult population vaccinated, we know the vaccine is very efficacious. Now, that doesn't mean that people won't get ill, because they will get ill. People get ill with all sorts of things. But the point is, you want to reach a stage where you can unlock, and we are going to have to take some risks as we do that, but they should be measured risks. These are live scenes now coming in from our bus. As you can see, the bus has relocated quite clearly to me, because I thought it was in Hyde Park Corner. But it is now at Piccadilly Circus. As you can see, there are thousands of people here filing past. Look, people of all ethnicities, all ages, young and old. It's really great to see. I think the point is, yes, no medical apartheid. Now, that's a very good point. Because the point is that many people are being denied the right to have operations. We saw 4.7 million people waiting for elective procedures. Now, I can tell you, 4.7 million people waiting for elective procedures is the highest waiting list we have ever seen in the NHS. And I have to say that when you talk to physicians, you know, when you talk to physicians, they say, and I ask these questions: how long do you think it will? How long do you think it will? You know, take to catch up? And the answer is, well, I don't think we can catch up. So the problem is that actually, I don't think the solution is going to be about throwing money at the system. The system clearly can't cope. And that was because that under multiple governments, they closed the number of beds. And here we are, more pictures coming in from central London, Piccadilly Circus, and just thousands of people there, as you can see, from Scotland, from Wales, and someone who's very happy, which is always nice to see. More pictures coming in from our reporters across London, so I can't quite make out that street name there, but obviously thousands of people on this Freedom March live. Thousands of people taking to the streets for their democratic right. And it is really extraordinary. There's nothing, as far as I can see, unless anyone can tell me differently, there is nothing to suggest that anyone is covering this. Now, I have been told that the BBC has now pushed out a helicopter, but Sky News still leading with Matt Hancock going on to Russian vaccines, Russian regions running out of vaccines. So absolutely hopeless coverage from them. Let's have a look now at what the BBC is currently saying. The BBC currently saying nothing about a march in London. So they are running with their top line as calls for Hancock to quit after kissing a colleague. And then they go on to the top story is things to check before booking a green list holiday. So the point is that we are fed mainstream media the whole time. I know that as someone who's worked in it. And the problem is that editorially, it clearly doesn't suit them to cover a march which is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And I don't think that is acceptable in this day and age. This is about democracy, and this clearly is not acceptable. So you can see thousands of people there gathering very good-naturedly. We've got families, we've got older people, younger people, people from all walks of life just coming together in London to say enough is enough. And this, I think, is about saying this is not a London-centric view. This is across the visiting all sorts of places in my job that people haven't been looked after. I'm just trying to read that. Our industry has been let down. Why is this acceptable? Very good questions, I would suggest, and I would put those to the Prime Minister and to the government and also the opposition, which isn't living up to its name. So live pictures still coming in. I mean, it really is extraordinary. If they're in Piccadilly Circus, this march is going to go on for some time because they have a long way to go. This march is 7.57 kilometres long. That's 4.7 miles. So extraordinary. And there's the map we can now see. So if they're at Piccadilly Circus, I'll just point out where that is. On the right of your screen, where the red bit is at the top, underneath that is a blue line. That is Regent Street, or coming down to Regent Street, or Oxford Street, and then down to Regent Street into Piccadilly. And Piccadilly is just there where they then turn and go down Haymarket down into Trafalgar Square, where it says London. That is Trafalgar Square. And that's where people are now. So you can see it's an awfully long way to go yet. So they still have to get from Trafalgar Square down onto the embankment and then walk along that embankment. The scenes I'm really keen on seeing are what happens at the Houses of Parliament. It would be absolutely extraordinary to see what people make of our elected politicians. And I think there's one point that really is worth making, which is that governments govern by a mandate of the people, and I'm not entirely convinced that the main parties have a mandate currently. It would be very interesting if there was a snap election today. It would be very interesting to see actually how people might vote. I think the government would get a lot of gold stars for the vaccine rollout, but I do think the wasted political capital. The fact is they've allowed Europe to now try and bully us, the EU, that the EU, or certainly Frau Merkel, is trying desperately to stop us going abroad without quarantining. So live scenes coming in from across London of Freedom March Live. So Richard Tice has now landed the helicopter. Richard, give us your reaction to what you've seen.
David, hi. Yeah, good afternoon. Just extraordinary scenes. The size and scale, David, of the crowd of freedom fighters, defenders of democracy. It was quite extraordinary seeing that. It must have been almost 2 miles long as it stretched. At the back was at Marble Arch, all the way along Oxford Street, around Oxford Circus, turning right, snaking just gently down Regent Street towards Piccadilly Circus. Peaceful, and it was a huge, huge crowd. It felt like at least the size of the equivalent of a crowd in Wembley Stadium. And what was quite amusing, to see, eventually we heard that another press helicopter had taken off. And we assumed that maybe we had forced the mainstream media to come and cover this massive, massive protest march of freedom fighters. But it appears maybe not. We saw them hovering over a tiny group of protesters sort of huddling together in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. We're not sure who they are. They might have been Extinction Rebellion. But anyway, that may tell you something about the attitude and approach, David, of the mainstream media. But today we have clearly shown everybody in the UK, from the cabinet, the Prime Minister, ministers, the opposition, that actually we will not allow them to silence us. It's quite clear this was a massive, massive protest march. And I think that unless the government ease all of these restrictions now, this is just going to grow, because you could clearly see from the scale of this march, David, that actually people have just had enough. We're done. We're done with these unnecessary restrictions. And we're done with the hypocrisy that we have seen utterly maximized this week with the hectoring Hancock, who's been sort of lording over the whole population of 67 million citizens of the UK, pretending that any of us that misbehaved, we would be killing our granny, when actually the person who was misbehaving the most was none other than, yes, Mr. Hancock himself. And I think people really have seen this government and this leadership for themselves. And it appears, from what we're hearing, that he's going to try and stay in his job, which just seems completely and utterly untenable. But let's see what the Sundays say. Let's see how the mainstream media pick up the huge protest march, David, that took place today, and of course is still taking place. We've landed because we came up against fuel restrictions, but we think that hopefully the quality of the aerial footage that people were able to see and that we've essentially sort of preserved for forever just shows the scale of this, and really and truly that it's time now that the government recognised that we've got to get going again. They've got to lift all the restrictions. There really is no reason for them not to do that. Frankly, well, if it was you and I, David, I'm quite sure we'd lift them tomorrow morning before church. But the government will probably wait. But there's no reason to wait any moment beyond July the 5th, because frankly, we've got to get on. We've got to put the foot flat on the accelerator of kickstarting our country again. First of all, actually rebuilding, David, some confidence and some self-belief amongst the 50% of the population that have unnecessarily been completely and utterly terrified into submission. And, that's a really, really important job, David.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Richard. I mean, it's quite interesting. I said just before I spoke to you that a government is there by the mandate of the people. And my sense from listening to people on the ground is that actually people see this duplicitous nature. The fact is there's one rule for them, one rule for us. And I think that really is the turning point in all of this.
Exactly. And people have seen that. There have been so many examples, haven't there? Whether it's the G7 leaders, whether it's Michael Gove creating his own pilot scheme so that his son and him could go and watch the Champions League final in Portugal and not have to quarantine when he got back, or whether it's people like cabinet ministers like Kwasi Kwarteng just disappearing on business trips overseas, and that's all fine and he doesn't have to quarantine, whilst they're all cajoling and forcing the rest of us to work from home, not to hug our loved ones. And so on. And then, of course, the ultimate hypocrite himself, the one and only, yes, Mr. hectoring Hancock. And look, I just think people have seen this lot for what they are. They consider themselves elite. They consider themselves not subject to the same rules. I think, David, that the Hancock moment will actually probably be an even greater issue and moment of angst, really, that much bigger than Dominic Cummings at Barnard Castle. I mean, that was pretty extraordinary. That upset millions of people up and down the nation. But when you've got someone like Hancock, who's been forcing people not to be able to say goodbye to their loved ones when they were in care homes, before they were sadly dying, not being able to have proper funerals, not being able to see their wives or partners have babies in hospitals, all the while this guy seems to be carrying on in his own sweet way, not having masks, socializing with whoever he wants, hugging and bottom slapping whoever he wants. I mean, it's just utterly mind-boggling. And now people really see him and this government for what they are, David.
I couldn't agree more. I think what is extraordinary, Richard, since we've been on air, my relationship with Test and Trace. I was telling people that I flew back from abroad, had an antigen test, two negative PCRs now, confined under these ridiculous quarantine. And of course, Test and Trace, and this is day 8 now, Test and Trace still banging around saying, am I isolating? Well, what a waste of resources that is. The point is that people, I just think we need to relook at the whole policy. Either the vaccines work or they don't work.
Completely. And, when you're asking, the huge percentage of the population to take a vaccine that's been given an emergency approval, and then essentially saying, well, thanks for taking the vaccine, but you've still got to remain locked down and you've still got to self-isolate if you get pinged by track and trace. Well, you sort of say, well, what's the point of all of this? And I go back to the constant shifting, David, of the goalposts, which has been utterly extraordinary from the beginning of this year, when it was Hancock himself that said, when we vaccinated the over 70s and the vulnerable, then we could cry freedom, and we essentially sacrificed Christmas in order to have a wonderful Easter. And then once we'd done the first 4 groups, then all of a sudden, oh no, it's the over 50s. And then after the over 50s, well, not quite sure, just a few more weeks, and then it's all adults. And you just think the goalposts have moved from the pitch. They've moved actually not only into the car park, but beyond the car park, into the field, towards the mountains. And then as they start to talk about vaccinating children, and then a bit like the Forth Bridge, repainting the Forth Bridge, you've got to start revaccinating everybody with booster jabs. You sort of think this is never, ever going to end. And then you realise, actually, is it about our health or is it about the money? And you've seen it with test and trace, and the quantity, David, of testing that is going on. So let's just reflect on that. They're doing, on average, almost 1 million tests a day. And they think they've been very clever at procurement, don't they? By buying almost some 750 million lateral flow tests. It seems that they've lost about 600 million of them. They can't track them down. Meanwhile, over in the States, the governing body over there, the FDA, has ruled that actually that very same test is not fit for purpose and should be put straight in the bin, never to be used again. Indeed, the manufacturer themselves have recalled it. So the rest of the world must be laughing at us, David. We're still using these tests, almost 1 million of them every single day, on our children. We're getting case rates that are barely above, hovering around the false positive rate, and hundreds of thousands of children end up having their education damaged, their mental health impaired, unable to continue being properly educated, because hundreds and thousands of them are literally being forced to have online teaching at home again. They're being forced once again to wear masks in corridors and classrooms. And you sort of think, does this ever end? And it's hard to know, but I just think that there's so much money involved.
I couldn't agree more. Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed. The footage you've provided from the helicopter has been extraordinary. And I have to tell you, Richard, I've had messages from many mainstream media organisations asking me what we're doing. So seriously, we must be rattling the cage a bit. And as you rightly say, that one of the other news organisations put a helicopter in the air, and I've just been contacted to do some interviews. So, the point is that actually today's been really useful because it has brought democracy to people at home. We are showing what is really going on in London and the views of people around the country.
Well, I just think it's absolutely essential. And, when we decided to do this, David, we just knew that it was vital to capture that strength of feeling and to prove it and to have the evidence, because of the way that we've been sneered at before, the way that we've been smeared before, and the way the whole thing has just been denied. And it's just not good enough. Either we have news organisations that are prepared to actually report the news, or why on earth should we bother being forced to fund them like the BBC? You can pay your money and takes your choice. And hopefully lots of people have seen with this footage, with the incredible show that you've hosted here today, David, that actually there's a different way of doing things. And we've been able to organise this. We've had some fantastic crowdfunding, and there's a different way of providing the news, and that's really, really important for for everybody to know what's truly going on. I'll hand back to you, David.
Well, it certainly is. Richard Tice, thank you very much indeed. Well, that was Richard Tice there, who's been in our helicopter providing unparalleled aerial coverage of the march that has taken place in London, is continuing to take place in London. We believe there are something like 150,000 people, if not more, on this march, and yet none of the mainstream media are covering it. And it's really important that we broadcast this, because it's important that you at home see what is happening in this country, and the government and the opposition are not showing you the truth. This is what is happening in our country. Normal, law-abiding citizens are taking up their democratic right, and they are protesting. They're protesting peacefully to say, look, you've changed the goalposts, as Richard said. Enough is enough. We want our freedom back. We want our liberty back. And that is what today is all about. This is about taking control and saying to the powers that be, we need proper political leadership, and we need to make a very clear message that Britain is open for business. You've been watching Freedom March Live. Thank you very much indeed for your company.